All right. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. It should be to the right of the video. If you're on a larger screen, smaller screen should be below the video. Just gotta type one thing up, and then we'll get started here. All right. So I just had one more thing to finish up there. So let's see what questions we got here. All right. So first question here is from Larry L. Question on shallowing course. With a 7-iron using a stronger grip at address, should the shaft be pressing forward or should it be in the center of your stance? Which is what I was always doing. Using a stronger grip, it seems hard to get the shaft in the center. How about the driver? It's really where it's most comfortable for you. If you're more comfortable with it in the center, right? Because what it matters the most is at impact. Where is the shaft at impact? That's what matters the most. So you put the club in it. You're not hitting the ball with your address position, right? So put the club in a position that allows you to make the best backswing and best downswing and to get in the best impact position. So you're going to look on tour and you're going to see players with the hands very far in front. You're going to see them within the center and everywhere in between, right? So it's really personal preference and what works best for you. There's no one area where the hands need to be at address. So RJ says, as I swing faster, I find the club face always being open. Any tips? I follow the shallowing course and have my natural grip set, which is already so strong as I can make it. Thanks. So yeah, if you already have a really strong grip, your other option to close the face is with your wrist angles, right? So we need to be kind of bowing the wrist as we're coming down. So if you look here, if I have a really strong grip where I take my hands and put them more on the side of the grip here, and then I bow my lead wrist, right? Look how closed that makes that face. It's too closed, right? So you've got to do some combination of those things. If I do the opposite, if I have a really weak grip, right, and then I cup my wrist, I do this with my lead wrist. Look what that does to the face. It opens the face, right? So if you've got a really strong grip and the face is still open, then odds are your lead wrist is very cupped. It about has to be, right? So really, really strong grip. So I've got my hands more on the side of the grip here. And then in order for me not to have that face closed, right? So would be just with a flat grip, with a flat face. Excuse me, flat wrist. You can see that face is still pretty dang closed, right? With a really, really strong grip. So you either need to make your grip stronger. You mentioned that you've made it as strong as you can. Did you really though? Right? Did you really make it as strong as you could, or could you go stronger? Right? Or we need to strengthen those wrist angles by bowing that lead wrist. So it's one of those two things you got to do to get it close. So Ben S says, I tried working on having my hips go back in the downswing for better compression of the ball, but now I'm hitting a lot of fat shots. What might I be doing wrong? Hard to say without seeing your swing, but most of the time when I see people hit the ground behind the ball, it's because they're not shifting their weight to their lead side. So make sure that you're getting to your lead side so that way you can make ball first contact. That'd be the first thing that I'd be looking at. Beyond that, what I'd recommend doing is working through our work along video. We have an awesome during the pandemic, we made some, or Clay made some videos for working on stuff indoors because we knew people were going to be inside and they weren't going to be able to go out and practice and things like that. So we wanted to give some people some tools and some things to work on at home, so that way their golf game wouldn't go to crap, when the pandemic was going on. So we actually have like an indoor vault series where we have lots of videos talking about practicing indoors and things like that. So in one of those videos, we did an indoor kind of work along video. It's like a 30-minute video where literally you're just kind of working along with Clay on getting better ground contact, getting rid of fat shots, right? So you don't have to do the drills indoors. You can do them outdoors as well, but I'd recommend working through that video. So to get to that video, all you have to do is go to the indoor vault. So select the instruction tab at the top, then select the vault categories, and then go to the indoor vault. You'll see it's work along number 2, the ground contact work along. That's what you're going to want to do. All right, so let's keep going here. So Tom M says, "Hi Q, you are probably aware of the rope drill where you swing a rope the equivalent of a 5-iron to get the feel of releasing the club. In my case, it seems to work as I can really feel I whoosh and release. Problem is, it doesn't carry over to the club, golf club. Any suggestions?" It's not really a release drill. It's more of a swing plane drill and a waiting in transition kind of drill. So if you're expecting it to get you to release the club out in front, that's not what that drill is meant for. That drill is meant for getting the club, feeling the club where you need to be swinging your arms to get the club on plane, and to also the feeling of kind of being a little bit more patient at the top of the swing, right? So a lot of people at the top of the swing, they start down like this, right? Well, they're, with the rope drill, you got to kind of let that rope kind of wrap around your armpit, and then you start down. So it gives you a little bit more patience right at the top. So other thing to keep in mind is that when you do a drill, it's just to help you to get the proper feeling. There's nothing magic about doing the rope drill. You can just as easily put the club in your hands and still swing off plane and not be patient at the top. So it's not like you do the rope drill for a minute and then you just grab a club and you're magically going to do it. It's you grab the club and you have to replicate the same feeling. You have to get the same feeling that you were doing when you're doing that. So that's what I would really try to do, is try to replicate that same feeling, that same exact thing. The other thing, the one thing about the rope drill that isn't the best is that it's not a rigid. It's not rigid, right? The rope is, you could have your hands like this, but the rope could be swinging this way, right? It's not going to swing in line with your hands, just like a club is going to. So that's kind of the downfall a little bit to that drill. I do like that it helps with kind of rhythm and sequencing and things like that. But and it can help with the plane, because as long as your hands are kind of in line with the rope, and it can help with the patience and things like that. But it's not really meant. I wouldn't say that it's meant as a release. So if you're expecting that, then you probably need to work through the straight line release course to get the club releasing the way that you want to. So Jim T says, I used some face tape on my driver and found a lot of heel strikes. What's the best or what's the cause? And do you have a good drill to correct? Hard to say what the cause is without seeing your swing. There's could be a lot of things going on there. But really the best way to correct is literally just to adjust your feel to get the desired result that you want. So if you're trying to hit the ball in the center of the face and you're hitting the ball off the heel a lot, then what you need to feel is like you're hitting the ball off the toe to get the ball to be more in the center of the face. So that's the first thing I would do, is I would just try to feel like you're hitting the ball off of the toe, and that will likely move the strike more in the center of the face. If it doesn't, then I exaggerate it 10 times more, right? I would feel like you may even need to feel like you're coming in. If this is the golf ball, you may need to feel like you're coming in and missing the golf ball completely. That may be what you need to feel like to get the ball more in the center of the face. Now, I know that's not an easy thing to do, especially if it's the first time you've ever tried doing something like that. but really, really commit to it. Go to the range. This isn't something you just take to the course. Go to the range and try it on the range so that way you can gain confidence with it. But even then, if you still have trouble, there's a few ways you can kind of trick yourself. So one would be with a tee. So if you're struggling with heel strikes, right, that means that the club's going out too far away from you, right? So what I would do is I'd take a tee and I would place it in the ground about an inch to the inside of your ball, and then set up to your ball as you normally would, and then try to hit the tee in the center of the face. And that will likely move the strike more in the center. That's one way you can do it. And then once you're able to do that, then take away the tee. And then when you do that, you got to visualize like the tee is there. So it's like earlier, there's nothing magic about doing that. It's not going to magically make you start hitting the ball in the center of the face. You still have to visualize that it's there. You still have to visualize and act like you're doing the drill, even though there's not something forcing you or helping you to do it, right? So it's that same kind of thing, right? So you have to visualize like it's there and like you're still trying to hit it, but it's just not there. But that's the next level of the drill. Beyond that, what you can do is you can take a head cover, place a head cover on the ground a little bit outside your golf ball. So one thing we want to understand is that in life, we do everything to seek comfort, right? We don't want to do anything uncomfortable. We do everything to seek comfort. So this drill can work a little bit better because you're going to want to avoid hitting this head cover because it's going to be uncomfortable if you hit it, right? You can imagine this being like a brick, right? It's going to be really, really uncomfortable if you hit that. So that can kind of force you to not hit the ball off the heel, right? And then once you're able to do that, remove the head cover, do the same thing. Visualize that it's there, and then go from there. But as far as from a technique perspective, I would need to see your swing. There's just so many different things that could be going on in order for me to know from a technical perspective what's going on. All right, let's keep going. So Tom M says, thanks. I understand. No problem, Tom. Okay, that was with the rope drill. So Willis says, I find it difficult to keep my head behind the ball when releasing out in front. What would be the first suggestion you would give me to correct this? So basically, you got to push into the ground, right? So you push into the ground, and then the ground pushes back at you. So if you can't stay behind the ball, it's because you're not pushing in the ground in the correct direction, right? So when you're coming into contact, you need to be pushing into the ground in that direction. So that way the ground pushes back at you in this direction, right? So I'm coming in, I'm going to push in that direction. So that way it can push me back, right? Whereas if I'm coming in, if I'm pushing into the ground in that direction, right, or straight down into the ground's just going to push me up, and I'm going to have momentum going forward. So you need to focus on pushing into the ground in the correct direction. Push back away from you in the direction that you're sliding into, so that way you're able to stay behind the ball. So RJ says, with long irons, ball should be forward in the stance, right? Should I still be hitting down on the ball with ball first contact? Maybe a quick run through low point with long iron, please. Yeah. So I wouldn't put the ball too far forward in your stance, if any. I mean, there really isn't any reason to, other than to help you maybe get the ball up in the air a little bit more. But we still need to be hitting down. Any shot that we're hitting off of the turf, we have to hit down on the ball because the ground's in the way. You can't hit up on a ball. I mean, you could, if you had a lie where maybe it was on some fluffy grass and there's a lot of kind of fluffy grass underneath the ball, and you can kind of hit up on it a little bit, you could do that, but you're not always going to be running into that. Most of the time you're not. Most of the time, you've got to make ball first contact. So you got to be hitting down on it. So you don't have to, if you can get the ball up in the air enough, but with having the same ball position as like your 8-iron, then with your 4-iron, then do that. One other thing to consider is maybe having hybrids, right? If you have trouble getting those balls up in the air, those shots up in the air, you may want to consider hybrids because they're a little bit easier to get up in the air instead of long irons. Use basically long hybrids essentially. And then, but I would only move it about a ball position about a ball forward with ball position, but we still need to hit down and through the ball with any shot that you're hitting off the turf. All right, so keep the questions coming here. All right. All right, so what does shallowing the club mean? So shallowing out the club means that we're taking the club from here, a more steep position. So you can think of that as the club pointing more down toward the ground, right? More vertically, to a more shallow position. So this would be going from steep to shallow, right? That would be shallowing out the club. And why is this important? Well, it's important because imagine if you did the opposite, right? If you were here, right, and then you steepened the club, well, from here, I'm going to have trouble hitting a good golf shot, right? Because basically, if I stay in my posture and I rotate through the ball, well, then I'm just going to swing way over the top, right? And when I swing way over the top, that's going to lead to pulls, pull hooks, slices. I'm just going to have a hard time hitting the ball solid when I do that. But what a lot of people do when they're coming down steeply and they're not shallowing out the club in the start of the downswing, especially better players who have kind of figured out how to hit a good shot from there, is they'll stand up out of their posture. Right? This is why standing up out of the posture is a huge problem in golf and why you see so many players do it, because the root cause is because they're coming down steep instead of shallowing out the club. So if we come down steep and then I stand up, well, look what happens to the club. It shallows, right? And now I can swing that club from the inside. But the problem is that I've stood up out of my posture, and now I have to extend my arms and early release the club to get to the ball. And while I can hit functional golf shots doing that, right, it's way better than staying in the posture and coming over the top and hitting slices and hooks and pulls and things like that. I can hit a functional shot where I want it to go, but it's going to be kind of a weaker shot because I've had to early release the club and I've had to add a lot of loft to the face, which basically takes my club, might take my pitching wedge and turn it into a lob wedge, right? And I'm just not going to hit the ball very far when I do that. I want to get shaft lean, right, and be able to compress the ball when I do that, so that way, I can control my ball flight and hit the ball farther, right? So in order to do that, I've got to get this club shallowing out, so that way I can stay in my posture. And I can rotate through the ball and have my hands in front and not have my club path way over the top and things like that. So that's essentially, the big reason why we want to shallow out the club. Now, you can have this club flat and then steepen it a little bit. There are some players that do that. One that comes to mind would be like a Ricky Fowler, who has this club really, really shallow at the top, and then he kind of steepens it a little bit, but he still has this club in a position that allows him to stay in his posture. It's still shallow. It's just he's steepening it to get it into a shallow position. So I know that's getting into the woods a little bit, but essentially what you're going to see almost every single tour player doing is they're going to bring this club up here, and then they're going to actually shallow out the club a little bit, right? This club is going to come down on a little bit flatter plane as they're starting down, and that allows them to stay in their posture and rotate, and they're going to be able to have this club on plane, in the slot, as you may have heard, and that's going to allow them to get the hands in front, get good compression on the ball, really, really control their ball flight, have a face stability, and things like that. So that's why it's really, really important. So if you want to work on shallowing out the club, we actually have a new course. It's called the 20-minute shallowing fix, and there's some things that we got to do to be able to shallow out the club. We got to have that face in a stronger position, right? So if I have this face open, I'm going to tend to want to come down steep to accommodate that, right? Because if I have this face open and I shallow out the club, I'm just going to hit the ball. I'm just going to hit like a push slice, right? So we have to get that face closed first. And we do that by finding our natural positioning move, our natural grip. For most people, that's going to be a stronger grip, right? We get the ball to start hooking. Then we're at least incentivized at that point to get the club shallowing out. And then once we're able to do that, we get the ball to start to the right and hook for a right-handed golfer. At that point, we tone it down to find our good stock ball flight. So it's 3 drills. They're about 20 minutes each. They, depending on where you're at with your game, it might take that long, but you may need to go through the drills a few times depending on where you're at with things. But we're getting great feedback on this course. I highly recommend you check it out. It's included with your membership. To find it, all you have to do is go to the instruction tab at the top, then go to the Top Speed Golf System, and select the 20-minute shadowing fix from there. All right, let's keep going here. So Aaron R says, "Hi Q, please talk about the importance of tempo in the full swing. Do you have any drills for tempo?" Tempo is really, it's really relative to you. There's players out there so the importance of tempo is basically finding the right tempo that works the best for you. That's the importance of it. There's players out there that have a methodical kind of swing. So Louis Oosthuizen is a very, very slow, deliberate kind of tempo, right? Look at John Rahm. That is not slow and deliberate. That is quick and snappy, right? So you got it, and it works really good for him, right? Because he's the number 1 player in the world and has been for a little while now. 7, 8 months, something like that. So yeah, you gotta find what works best for you. So a good way to kind of find what your tempo is, what I would recommend doing is go to both ends of the spectrum. This goes for about anything, right? If you're trying to find, because there's so many ways to do the golf swing, in the Top Speed Golf System, those are all the things that all the best players do. Those are the things that are absolute truths, basically non-negotiables if you want to be a good golfer. But everything else in between is kind of, you got to find your way to do it, right? So that's why you're going to see lots of different tempos on tour. You're going to see different lengths of swings. You're going to see a lot of different stuff, right? But they're all doing the Top Speed Golf System. So whenever you're not sure what works best for you, the best way to kind of figure that out is to go to both ends of the spectrum, right? So what that means is take some swings where you're literally swinging with as slow as tempo as you possibly could, right? So that might be like a 5-second golf swing where it's kind of like this, where we're going back, we're really, really slow, right? And we're coming through and I'm hitting the ball. Now, obviously that wouldn't be the tempo that would work best for you because it's really, really slow, but then you can gradually build it up from there until basically you're swinging as quick as you possibly can. Somewhere in between there is where you're going to find where you're most comfortable and you get your best results, right? So that's what I recommend doing if you're trying to find your correct swing tempo. Anthony A says, please define pull hook. A pull hook for a right-handed golfer would be a ball that starts to the left. It starts left and then keeps hooking to the left excessively, right? So it starts left and then keeps curving from right to left excessively. That's what I would define as a pull hook. So Ross S says, when shallowing the club in the downswing, will the club be wide open halfway down and then the strong grip will naturally square it up? No, we would want that. Ideally, we would want it to be pretty square all the way down, right? We don't want to be coming down right here, right? And then trying to square it. There's just not enough time, right? From halfway down to the golf ball. I mean, you're talking, that's a split second, right? You don't have time to really get the face to square up, right? So generally what you're going to see with most players is you're going to see that club face is going to kind of match the back angle, right? So you can see my back angle there. That club face is going to kind of match that. That would be a pretty good spot to be. Now, if it's a little bit more closed than that, that's fine. You just have to have more shaft lean to accommodate that, right? If it's more open than that, right, then there's going to be things that, and if you do these things naturally, that's fine, but there's going to be things that you need to be doing as you're coming down into the ball to square it up. Otherwise, you're going to be early releasing the club. Typically, when I see people with this face open, right, when they're coming down, they have to early release the club to square it up, right? So I generally like to see that face kind of squaring up all the way down already being in a good position, basically being right here. So that way you can just turn through and be in a good spot. There isn't, it's just kind of like a natural swinging through of the club. All right, so let's keep going here. We got 30 minutes or so left, so keep the questions coming. All right. So Ron Page says, I am beginning the 20-minute shallowing fix. I have no trouble pull hooking the ball. However, hitting it to the right seems impossible. Any suggestions? Well, there's lots of things in that video that you need to go through. So one is putting an obstacle there, right? So, Clay talks about having like the impact bag there, putting some sort of obstacle to force you to swing from the inside, right? So that would be the first thing that I would try. If you still can't do it there, then I would look at maybe the wall drill. So the wall drill is where we stand up a little bit away from the wall, and then we go up to the top and we keep the club head kind of on the wall as we're coming down, and that's going to help you to get that club working from the inside. So that's what I would recommend doing, is looking at those two drills, kind of the plan B and plan C, to get the club working from the inside. That's what I'd be looking at doing. And if you still can't do it from there, really what it comes down to is you got to probably slow down a little bit, right? So one thing to understand is the key to progression is regression, right? So what that means is that if you are doing everything in your power at full speed with the golf ball and everything there to get that club to work from the inside, there isn't anything you can do, then what you have to do is you have to regress things. So regressing things would be slowing down. That'd probably be the first thing I would do, is I would slow down. Speed takes away feel. So if you slow down, it makes it easier to get the club to work from the inside. It makes it easier to organize your movements, right? And then once you're able to do that, then you can try to speed it back up again. It breaks down, slow it down again, try again. So that'd be the first thing I try. The next thing I would try is maybe shortening the swing, right? Things are harder to do in a longer swing, or most things are harder to do in a longer swing versus a shorter swing. So slowing down, shortening the swing, possibly doing it without a golf ball, right? So doing it in a practice swing and then trying to do it with a golf ball. So those would be kind of in that order. Is what I would recommend doing, is slowing down. But I would try usually those first two drills do the trick, because they help you to get the proper feeling that you need to have. All right, let's keep the questions coming here. All right. So how do you use the hips in the downswing? So the key to using the hips in the downswing is to have some bend in the hips as we start down. So typically when I see people not using the hips correctly in the downswing, it's because they extend the hips right away. So let's go over a couple terms. So one, we have bend. So you can think of bend as this angle between my legs and my spine. That would be bend. If I'm making that angle smaller, that's bend. If I'm making it bigger, I'm extending, right? So if I go up to the top of the swing, if I make that angle bigger to start the downswing, that would be extending, right? And if I do that, what tends to happen is I will stand up out of my swing, and then we call that early extension, and then I will early release the club, right? So what I want to do, or what we see the best players doing, is they bend to start the downswing. So we flex the knees out over the toes, right? So the knees kind of flex out over the toes. Some might call that a squat move, right? So we flex the knees out over the toes, and we flex the hips, right? We bend at the hips to move down into the ball, and then from there, we later on, that's when we'll extend through. So we want to extend. It's called early extension because we do extend. We just don't want to do it too early, right? So we're going to bend to basically this lead arm parallel position, and then from there, we're actually going to start to extend through the ball into impact, right? And that's going to allow you to kind of clear the hips and rotate through the ball, right? So the actual movement is pretty simple, right? So we're bending and turning through, and then we're extending through. But the reason why so many people have trouble with this is because of how the club is coming down in the downswing, right? So if I'm coming down steep, right, I don't have any incentive to stay in my posture and use my hips properly, right? I don't have any incentive to do that, because if I do, then I'm going to come over the top. Kind of like what we talked about earlier is basically, if we stay in our posture and the club is steep, I'm going to swing over the top, and I'm going to hit really, really bad shots from there. That's what very high handicappers typically do. So what a lot of people will do in order to get the club to shallow out is they will use the hips in a way that we don't see the best players doing, but that's because the best players are shallowing out the club, right? So odds are, if you're not moving your hips the correct way, it's not because you don't know how to move your hips. It's because you're moving your hips in a way to help you hit a functional golf shot, right? So if I'm coming down and I'm steep, right, well, then I can extend. If I extend my hips and I kind of square up my body to the ball at impact, well, now I can get that club to swing from the inside, right? So if I'm steep and I extend my hips, look what happens to the club. It shallows out. And now I can swing from the inside. I can hit a functional golf shot, but I'm going to add loft. I'm going to early release, right? I'm not going to get that compression. I'm going to tend to hit thin shots because my club is releasing early. I'm not going to hit those really, really solid shots that we see the tour players doing. So the reality is that if you want to learn to move your hips in the right way, you have to first be incentivized to do that. And most people just, especially recreational golfers that I work with, they're just not incentivized to do that because the club is not in a shallow position coming down. So if you want to move your hips properly, the very first thing you need to do is you need to get the club shallowing out in the start of the downswing. And the best way to do that is to work through our 20-minute shallowing fix course, right? So this is a course that's included with your membership. All you have to do is go to the instruction tab, click the Top Speed Golf system, and then click the 20-minute shallowing fix to get started on the drills. And what we want to do is we actually want to get this club shallowing too much, so that way we have to rotate the hips. Because if you watch here, if I'm coming down and I have this club too shallow, and then I move my hips in the wrong way, well, look what happens to the club. The club's going to be too much from the inside. I'm going to hit blocks. I'm going to hit snap hooks. I'm not going to hit functional shots either. So what I need to do is, once I get the club shallow, is I need to move my hips properly and rotate my hips. So once you get the club shallowing, then you want to think about, okay, well, now I'm getting the club too shallow. How do I move my hips so that way I get the club back on plane where it needs to be, and then I can get my hands more easily in front and to get forward shaft lean and all those things that I want. So that's going to come from bending those knees out over the toes, flexing the hips down as you're starting out. It's not complicated. It just seems really complicated because you don't have any incentive to do it, and your brain knows that. And it just makes it really difficult. So you got to put yourself in a place where you're incentivized at least to do it. And that's going to be by shallowing out the club. So once I get it shallow, I bend my hips down, and then I'm going to be able to turn through with it. All right. So we got a couple questions here. So Willis says, been practicing knockdown shots by playing the ball a little back and cutting off my follow through. The ball seems to release and roll too far on the green. How do I put more backspin on the shot to check it up a little bit? You can try hitting down on it a little bit more. But in reality, if you hit it lower, it's not going to have as much spin. Knockdown shots just by association are not going to have much spin. Now, keep in mind, what's the situation when you're going to hit a knockdown shot? Into the wind, right? And when you hit into the wind's going to add more spin. So, if you're hitting, especially if you're hitting a knockdown shot downwind, I would expect it to do exactly what you're talking about. So I don't know what kind of conditions you're hitting it in, but knockdown shots in general are going to have less spin on them. You can try to maybe get more spin on it by trying to hit down on it a little bit more. Clean contact is also a big part of it. If you're hitting behind the ball at all, getting anything in between the club and the ball, you're going to reduce the amount of spin. You're not going to get as much friction on the ball, which is going to help you get spin. But keep in mind, like I said, hitting into the wind, that's going to add spin to the ball. So you won't have, when the times when you're really going to be hitting that shot, you're going to be able to get that spin on there most likely. So John S. says, is the shear force of the lead leg a midway through the downswing move or earlier? Basically, lead arm parallel is when you want to be applying as much force into that lead leg as possible. That's when you look at the better players, that's when it's happening, right? So I'm here, I'm going up to the top. As I'm getting into this area, I'm starting to shift pressure into my lead foot. I'm basically 50-50 at the top of the swing. And then as I start down, as I get in that lead arm parallel position, that's when I'm applying the most force into my lead leg in the swing. And then from there, I'm unraveling. So it depends on where your definition of midway down is. If midway down for you, your definition of that is lead arm parallel, then yes. I would say it's, for most people, it's probably a little bit later. All right, so Roger B says, working through first few lessons of shallowing fix and happy to report I've added about 20 yards to my short irons, struggling with anything longer than a 9-iron. Any suggestions, or just keep working through it? Let me know what's the struggle. I mean, give me something specific. Like you're hitting the ball left, the ball is the ball's hooking too much. Give me an idea of what's going on. I'll be happy to help. But yeah, without any knowledge of what the struggle is, it's kind of hard for me to help. Tyler K says, can you explain a little more about the left knee turning out towards the target, specifically as it relates to what you were just talking about with the early weight shift? Yeah. So if our knees are like this, right? If we're starting down and our knees cave in like this, you're going to have a hard time rotating, right? So imagine if you were on like standing in the middle of a merry-go-round and you were trying to get that merry-go-round to turn, right? Well, you wouldn't go like this, right? Because that wouldn't be very powerful. You got to kind of flex your knees out over your toes as you start down, right? So we're up at the top. Our knee is kind of kicked in as we turned our hips, but as we start down, we want that knee to kind of go back out, so that way we can use the ground and turn the ground, right? And that's a big thing that I typically see in players is they kick that knee in, but then they kind of come down and it stays in. I'm exaggerating, but it kind of ends up like that. And if we're like this, you're not going to be able to turn, right? So we really need to feel like those knees flex out over the toes when you start the downswing to get the rotation properly started. All right, so if you're hitting it thin, okay, Roger. So if you're hitting it thin, I'd look at your ball position. Ball position might be too far forward. Someone earlier talked about hitting long irons. I see a lot of people with the longer clubs. They just put the ball way too far forward in their stance. Just because the club is longer doesn't mean we play it where the driver is. Not saying that that's what you're doing, but that's just something that I see a lot of people doing. So play your longer irons in the same place you play your 7-iron, especially if you struggle hitting those shots thin. Play it in the same place you play your lower irons as well. So that would be kind of the first thing I would do, because odds are your club's bottoming out before the ball. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when we swing more from the inside, right, the club's going to bottom out more before the ball. So you have to get your weight shift more forward in order to do that. So those would be the two things I'd be looking at. Ball position, I would get that probably, I like to see a little bit forward in the middle of the stance, kind of straight down from the lead ear. That's a good ball position for most people. And then I'd make sure that you're shifting your weight forward. Now try to imagine that you're getting that divot in front of the ball there to help you get some more solid shots. Excuse me. So Jay Solly says, I have issues with over the top, center face contact, and pressure shift. Would the new shallowing program be a good way to work on these issues? Yes, absolutely. I mean, basically, it's over the top is the opposite of shallowing out the club, right? So, and a lot of times people will. So those all of those things kind of go together, right? So if you're over the top, that is going to lead typically to poor face contact, because when I'm over the top like this, that means that the sweet spot of the club is kind of working toward me as it gets to the ball. And I see a lot of people struggle with toe strikes when they tend to come over the top, because the sweet spot's working toward them. So it kind of brings the toe more into it, right? So the center face contact typically is a problem with people that come over the top. Pressure shift is also typically a problem with those that come over the top, because when you come over the top, right? If I'm coming over the top like this, I'm going to tend to hit the ground more toward the target, right? So if I come over the top and I shift my weight forward, my ground contact is going to be way too far forward. I'm going to be chopping down way into the ball. So a lot of times when people come over the top, what they'll do is they'll stay back on their back foot, so that way they can hit the ground where the ball is, right? So all of those things are kind of blending together. So what you need to do is get the club shallowing out, and that's going to help you to get the sweet spot working toward the ball instead of near you, right? And then you're actually going to be incentivized to swing from the inside, to shift your weight to your lead side. Because if you don't, if you shallow out the club and swing from the inside, you swing from your back foot, off your back foot, you're going to hit the ground way back here. So you got to put yourself in a position to be incentivized to move in the proper way. And the shallowing fixed course is more than likely a really, really good thing for you to do. So Roger B says, thanks, Q, no problem. Peter B says, will you explain the different uses for the wide radius and the narrow radius pitch shots? If you want a wider radius, it keeps a little bit more bounce on the club. I think it's probably a little bit more of a higher percentage kind of shot. So, if we hinge the club a lot, we're going to introduce a lot of shaft lean, and we're going to introduce the leading edge a little bit more. So I would only do that if you need to get a lot of spin, if you need to introduce some speed and get some spin, or if you're opening up the face a lot to keep some of that bounce in there. And again, if you open up the face a lot, again, that's a lower percentage shot. So what I like to see people do is have the face square to maybe just slightly open, have a smaller, just a little bit of hinge, so a little bit wider radius. So that way they can keep that bounce on there and not get too much shaft lean. We do want some shaft lean, right? We want to come in, because let's say you have a 8-degree bounce wedge, right? Well, if you get 8 degrees of shaft lean, you're taking all the bounce off of there, right? So, but we want some shaft lean to have a stable, to be able to hit it more stable, right? So that's why I generally recommend a little bit more bounce for most players. I like to see somewhere, 10 to 14 degrees of bounce. It's a safety net. It just makes things a lot easier if you have some bounce on the club. So face a little bit open, a little bit wider radius is just going to be a higher percentage shot. If you absolutely need to, drive it in low with a lot of spin and things like that, actually, you kind of use the same technique. You just kind of lean into it a little bit more to get it to go lower. If you need it to come out really, really low, really, I don't recommend using a wedge. I recommend just using a lower lofted club. But if you need that spin with it, then that'd be the time when you kind of you would use a narrower radius to get more shaft lean and de-loft it. All right, let's keep going. So Matthew says, I seem to lose my weight shift and staying back, resulting in topped, hitting ground before the ball. Would you go over the drills of proper weight shift and timing? Matthew, what I want you to do is I want you to go do the work along video that we have. That's going to be the best thing for you to do. What I'll actually do here is I'll just put it in the, let's see if I can find it. I'll put it in the chat window here so you can just go straight to that. That's going to be the best thing for you to do. So this is an awesome video. It's like a 30-minute long video where you literally just work along with what Clay is doing. It is an indoor video, but you can do this outdoors as well. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to work on it inside. But yeah, check out that video. That's why I would recommend you go do. So during my last round, I has a difficult time getting my iron. During my last round, I struggled to get iron and fairway wood shots to launch. Too many were worm burners. What was my most likely mistake? Sounds like you're just topping it. So you need to get your ground contact. You need to get that club bottoming out more in front of the ball so you can get ball first contact. So that's what I would look at. That video that I just posted in there, I would go work through that as well. So Tyler K says, any suggestions for developing feel for swinging with the left side? Feel like I am pulling the club versus throwing the right side. So really, it's the golf swing is like throwing a frisbee, right? With your lead side. That's kind of the motion with the lead side. So I would imagine like you have a frisbee, right? And you're throwing that frisbee. So your body's now at an angle, right? And you're throwing that frisbee. That's what the golf swing looks like. And then with the trail side, it's like skipping a rock across the water. So I just try to have that feeling like you're leaning into it and then throwing a frisbee. That's the feeling that you want to have with the lead side. All right, we got about 10 minutes left. So what is the difference between chipping and pitching? So chipping, I would call a chip shot, and this is kind of subjective. There's no like definition like in the Webster's dictionary on the distinction between the two. This is kind of what I feel is the difference between a chip and a pitch. But a chip is a shot that you are trying to get on the green and rolling toward the hole like a putt as soon as possible. So this is typically going to be done with a lower lofted club. You can really do chip with basically any club in the bag for the most part. But, ideally what you'd want to do is you'd want to get the ball carried onto the green about, 4, 5, 6 feet, and then get it rolling toward the hole. That's ideally the way you'd want to do. I like to chip a lot with my pitching wedge because for me, with my pitching wedge, and this is just a generality, for me, if I can carry a pitching wedge halfway there and it will roll the other half of the way. Now, obviously, if it's uphill, if it's really soft, if the greens are really slow, that plays a role. But just general conditions, usually it's half and half. So that's why I like to chip a lot with my pitching wedge because I can very easily find my landing spot when I do that. So as far as chipping technique is concerned, it's very close to what a putting stroke is, We just want to get our knees involved a little bit more. We want to get our legs more involved. So I'm just trying to come in very, very shallow. A lot of times I'm going to choke up on the club. I'm going to stand the club up a little bit more so that the toe is going to be a little bit more on the ground. And I might even play it a little bit, just a hair toward the toe. And I'm going to take very, very close to a putting stroke. The only difference is, like I said, is I'm going to unlock my knees and my hips, right? So this would be kind of a chip stroke. I'm going to have my body forward. So this would kind of be my putting stroke. It would be like that. But my chip stroke would be more like this, where I'm moving my hips back and through. And I really want to feel this club coming through and just brushing the grass. And then you get that nice click with the ball, get the ball up in the air a little bit, and then get it rolling. So, I chip sometimes with my hybrid, right? If I want to just get that ball going. So, that'd be a chip. Now, a pitch is a shot that you're usually going to use more loft, because a pitch is a shot that you're going to carry most of the way to the hole, and then you're going to stop the ball with spin, right? And you're going to need a wedge. You're going to need loft to be able to do that. So with a pitch, what I'm doing, again, I'm going to have my feet close together. I'm going to unlock my knees. I'm going to get a little bit of wrist hinge, right? I'm going to get a little bit of wrist hinge in there. I'm going to turn through with that loft, and I'm going to get that ball up in the air. And I'm going to try and carry it most of the way and stop it with spin. So what's really, really important for that spin is to make really, really clean contact. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to chop down into the ball, right? We want to come in nice and shallow and just kind of pick the ball off the top of the turf and make perfectly clean contact with it to get that nice snap amount of spin. So that's really the difference there. I mean, you can hit a chip from just off the green. You can even hit a chip from a little bit off the green. Might be a little bit of a difficult shot. Generally, the further you're away, you're going to be better off hitting a pitch. But you can hit a pitch from very, very close or up to 70, 80 yards, depending on how much club head speed you have, right? So really, it's just about carrying the ball most of the way to the hole with loft, with spin, with a pitch shot versus a chip shot that's typically going to be less loft, so there's going to be less spin. It's going to get rolling better. Generally, a chip, if you can do it, I'd recommend doing a chip because it's just a higher percentage shot for most players. One, you're going to be taking a smaller swing. Two, you're going to be using a club that's not going to want to dig as much. So like a wedge, it has this sharp leading edge on there, which is going to tend to want to dig. You can have perfect technique where you use the bounce and everything, and it can still dig on it. It's going to tend to want to dig a little bit more than an 8-iron would, right? So it's just generally going to be a higher percentage shot to get that ball rolling. Anyone who I've seen that has an excellent short game knows how to chip really well, right? There's a lot of players that pitch really well, but all the guys that I know that can do both really, really well. So that's what I'd recommend doing. And if you can, I would try to chip to get a higher percentage play. But we do have courses on the website if you want to learn how to chip and pitch. So chipping, we have our chipping mastery course. And with pitch shots, we have our Tusby Golf wedge system. So if you want to check those courses out, all you have to do is click the house icon at the top of the page. These are courses that are included with your membership. Click the house icon at the top of the page and then scroll down on the home page there, and you'll see a list of all the courses, 20 plus courses included with your membership. Select the course that you want to work on to improve your short game. All right, so we got some questions coming in here. So Greg H says, is it okay to shallow the club at the top of the backswing and then start the downswing? I don't generally recommend that because if you shallow it, you're going to tend to steepen it, right? So if I go up to the top like this, I'm going to tend to go like that. Now that can work. Like I said earlier, Ricky Fowler, that's basically what he does. But if you steepen it, you have to steepen it into a good position, right? So if you look at Ricky, he's like this, and then when he comes down, he's like that. Right, but with most people that I see who try to shallow it in the backswing, they tend to do this in the downswing, and they're in this kind of position. So I don't really recommend that. I recommend getting the club to go up more, so that way it's easier to shallow it out. It's also better for power, typically, when you have a steeper backswing to a shallower downswing. So John S. says, this is top control golf to me. All right, sounds good. So Gordon D says, "Hi Q, can you please talk a little about judging distance from a greenside bunker?" It's something you got to go practice. If you want to get good at developing the skill of understanding how hard you need to hit a shot, you have to go practice it. So that's what I'd recommend doing. Go to a practice bunker, or if you're playing, throw a few balls in a bunker. If you're just kind of playing for fun, throw a few balls in the bunker and try to hit them in different, because you're controlling the distance the same way you're controlling the distance with any other shot, right? It's with loft and how hard you're hitting it, right? So if I hit it harder, the ball's going to go farther. If I have less loft, the ball's going to go farther, right? So if you're maxed out, if you're hitting your lob wedge out of the bunker and you've got a 30-yard shot and you can only hit it 20 yards, use a lower lofted club. If that's a 60-degree wedge that you're using, go down to like a 56-degree wedge and see how far you can hit that, or a 50-degree wedge, right? There's no law that you have to use a certain club out of the bunker. You can use any club out of the bunker. So use less loft if you need to hit it farther. And then as far as knowing with those shorter bunker shots, knowing how hard to hit it, that's just something you have to go practice. You got to go practice and learn to develop the feel for how hard you need to hit the shot to get it to go a certain distance. Learn by doing. All right, so Tyler K says, "Can you talk about shallowing the club and bowing the wrists on shots with shorter backswings? Light practice, or like, I think he means like pitches, half swings, three-quarter shots." Yeah, so basically, there typically isn't going to be a huge need to shallow out the club because the club's already going to be there, right? So if I elevate my arms, I've got to shallow out the club. But if I'm only right here, well, that club's already pretty shallow. Now, I don't want to get here and then go like that. I just want to kind of keep it there, right? So it's not really any different. It's just toned down, right? And just like at the top of the swing, I don't need to open the face very much, right? As I go up to the top of the swing, I kind of need to open the face more to get it up there. Whereas if I take a shorter swing, I don't need to do this. I can just keep it like that, right? So the club's just already kind of shallow. You just have to keep it there. So that's what it comes down to. You're just doing a toned down version of it with shorter swings. So last question here from Tim R says, "At address with an iron, how far should the toe of the club be off the ground?" I mean, again, it doesn't really matter. It's just about where the club comes in at impact. Ideally, at impact, the club would be flush, right? So generally, the toe is going to be a little bit up, right? Just if your arms are kind of hanging straight down, the toe is going to be a little bit up. But that doesn't mean that you can't set up like this. Bryson basically sets up like this, right? And it works pretty well for him, right? So there's no set amount. That's not something that I'd be worried about how you're getting it to impact. Tyler K says, "Office hours is dope." Professor Q on the mic. Thanks, bro. No problem, Tyler. Glad to help, buddy. All right, so everybody have a great rest of your weekend. I'm going to jump off here. I'll be back here Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.